What has gotten into Myles Turner this year, the best season of his career so far? I want to dive into some of the numbers that are defining his start. Plus, then Pacers Wizards tonight. Finally, we can get some Wizards and team building perspective from Matt Moderno of Bleav in Wizards and Bullets Forever on SB Nation. Lots coming on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today, lots to dive into. We're going to start by talking some Myles Turner, another big night for him on Wednesday against Minnesota with 23 points. I want to talk about what's getting into his big numbers this season, because he looks, quite frankly, better at mostly everything that he's doing on the court this year, what it means for him and the Pacers. And then Pacers Wizards tonight. They've already played twice, but they were both kind of in times where it didn't make sense to talk about the Wizards yet. So Matt Moderno from Bullets Forever and the Bleav in Wizards podcast will join us to talk Pacers, Wizards, and team building philosophies from that Washington side. But we'll start and open up today by talking about Myles Turner, who has been just awesome this year. I mean, I don't think that is a secret to anyone that his numbers are the best they've been in a while. His impact has been elevated. He looks like a better player than the Myles Turner that anyone has seen throughout his career, right? And he's always talked about how he feels like he's only scratched the surface of his potential. And sometimes people rolled their eyes at that because there were years and years of evidence of his stats being about the same. But this year he is putting his play where his mouth has always been. And his stats, his high-level stats, the most obvious ones are obviously stand out, right? 17.8 points per game, career high by over 3 points, right? And his second best was his second year. Rebounding, 8.1 per game, career best over, again, anything by 0.8, 2.5 blocks still. His assists, quietly, the second best they've ever been in his career. His three-point percentage, career best. His field goal percentage, career best. His two-point percentage, second best behind last year of his career. His free throw percentage, career best. Slice it up however you want. He's making plays, and he's making stuff happen out there in a role that he is more comfortable in. And I recently wrote about him. This segment is half because I have these quotes and numbers on the front of Brain. But you know, something I asked him about in the preseason, right? He always talked about feeling more natural at center. He's getting that on this team. And reminder, this quote is from preseason. This was after they played the Rockets at home. But he said, "I absolutely love being the five. I think it's my natural position. I think that being at the five is where I need to be and where I want to get more reps." So I do think that playing a more natural position has been a big part of his growth and improvement this year, as much as, of course, natural improvements and playing with a guy like Halliburton who can get him the ball where he's the best. But also as his confidence grew, right, as he's figured out how to be that five and be more important in areas inside the arc, I think that's noteworthy. And that's just not my own eye test. Obviously, you all can watch the games and see that. But, you know, even Sabonis, right? When we were in Sacramento, I asked Sabonis about Myles. He said Myles is at the five now, playing in a different role. He's not shooting as many threes as he used to. He's rolling, right? Like, everybody can see this. And oh, by the way, he is shooting almost as many threes as he used to. It's a little down, 0.3 down per game from last year. But in general, I think it's very obvious, both from watching the Pacers, from listening to people talk, looking at the numbers, that Myles is, one, obviously playing a more what's traditionally considered five role on offense, while still being that stretch big, right? Was huge from deep against Minnesota. Both times they played them, for example, when the team needs him to spread out, he can still do that. He did that against the Lakers when Anthony Davis was patrolling the paint, for example. Like, because he has that years of experience doing that, when he needs to mix it up, he can. But now he can go inside in a way that he hasn't for much of his career. And I think that's been a huge part of his surge, and a big part of what Rick Carlisle always kind of thought would be the actualized version of Myles Turner, is one that mixes it up after screens, right? Can do the diving stuff, can do the cutting stuff, but also can be this lethal pick and pop big with great shooting stroke and adding, of course, fantastic defense. So you can cut up the numbers however you want, but Turner playing the five has been both good for him and the Pacers, right? His numbers look great on both ends. His impact numbers look solid on both ends. That's why people are asking questions about a contract extension. I just wrote about that. If you want the mechanics of that over at Forbes, if you want to read into that, I don't want to talk about that today, and I still don't think an extension is going to happen. But There's a couple more numbers I want to dive into that kind of detail how good he is playing at the 5 and sort of show the varied range of his game this season, right? Because if you dive into the shooting numbers by location, right? Myles Turner from 0 to 3 feet in his career, he's over 70%. That's great. He was at 79% last year, which is great. Over 70% each of the last 2 years. This year, from 0 to 3 feet, Myles Turner is shooting 82.3%. That's unbelievable. Obviously, those are easy shots up close. He takes a lot of wide open ones. That's still better than he's ever done before with similar shot diet. He's dunking it more, which is a part of him being confident. He's getting easy looks. He's rolling at the right times. He's cutting at the right times, right? That's an insane efficiency. 82.3% right at the rim. From 3 to 10 feet, where he's got that little hold it above his head shot going on, 53%. Mid-range, he's hitting them too. Like, his variety from 15 feet and in has been really good this year. He's been able to knock those shots down, but it's not just that he's making them. It's also how he's getting them and how the team has set him up to succeed in those instances, right? So let's dive into some of those numbers, right? I've got a lot here. Paint touches per game for Myles Turner this season, 6.4 per game. That is the second best of his career, behind his second season when Nate McMillan was, you guessed it, having him as the lone 5. He's been allowed to venture in there more often, get more touches, make more plays in the paint. For example, last year playing alongside Sabonis, 4.3 paint touches per game. The year before that with Depot and the changing team, 3.7 paint touches per game. 2019-20, a year they were kind of good, 3.4 paint touches per game. 2017-18, their best year of his tenure, 3.7, right? Way up into the sixes this year, almost double what it has been through many of his seasons with the Pacers. So he's getting more touches in the paint. And when that's combined with actually good efficiency, as well as good pick and roll game, good cutting game, right, that makes him more threatening. Teams have to think about him in a different way. They can't just be ready for the pop and kind of change their angle, knowing they won't have to run to the basket after he sets a screen. Now they have to think about both at the same time, which has always been an idea of what makes Myles Turner good in a lot of these role situations, but never something he's done consistently. This year he is. And that's as much on him improving and being better as it is on the team for setting him up in a situation to finally do that. And it's on Tyrese Haliburton for being good at finding him when he's in those situations to succeed. So looking at his cutting, right? That's one thing I've talked about him being much better at. For example, NBA.com tracks play types for players. So 14.5% of Myles Turner's possessions where he is used, he's cutting, right? That is quite a bit. Last year, that number was 8%, right? So 6.5% more of his possessions he's cutting this year. 1.52 points per possession, for Myles Turner when he's cutting this year, shooting 75% on those possessions where he cuts and gets the ball. That's fantastic. 84.3 percentile in the league. Last year, he was in the 75th percentile, right? Points per possession was lower. The frequency was lower. So he's cutting better. And I think some of that is, that they can mix it up with Jalen Smith. But Haliburton, if guys cut, he's going to find him, right? So guys have to be on their toes. That sometimes accounts for transition stuff. He's doing a great job at all that. The other one is the pick and roll stuff, right? And this is something, when Carlisle was introduced as the coach, he was asked a lot about, hey, a big question for this team is how can Sabonis and Turner work? Well, what do you think about that? And he said, well, I think something we can do with Myles is have him roll and be a lob threat. And that didn't happen last year, but it kind of did this year, right? So looking at those numbers this year in the pick and roll man game, Myles Turner, 21.8% of his possessions, he's a roll man. Over 1 in every 5 of his possessions, he's a roll man. 1.24 points per possession in those instances. That's very good. Last year, 16.5% of his possessions were as the roll man, so about 5% less, 1.16 points per possession. That's even lower, and he's shooting 57% in those roll man situations. So 2 play types that he didn't get to do as much, and it made sense to make Sabonis do those things more. He was better at them. But Turner is showing this year that he's also good at them, and the fact that he can mix up his game and still succeed inside the arc with those skills makes him a high-level guy that can do both things. Well, he can roll, cut, and shoot the ball. This has not come at the sacrifice of threes, where he's still taking 4 per game, 5 per 36 minutes, right? He took 5.3 per 36 minutes last year. So there's not much sacrifice going on, but a lot of gain as his role has increased and kind of been actualized in a way that makes him a more threatening center. And that's why he's averaging career numbers everywhere, and why there's a lot of chatter about his fit with this team long term, which you can read more about at Forbes Sports, where I posted something about his numbers and him wanting to play center and his feel at center and the digits behind what a contract extension could look like. Now let's talk some Wizards. Pacers Wizards tonight, a team that Myles Turner's done very well against throughout his career. Matt Moderno is going to join us from SB Nation's Bullets Forever, as well as the Bleav in Wizards podcast. Before we talk about the Wizards and team building, let me first tell you about two great groups of people. The first one being MasterClass. With MasterClass, you can learn from the world's best artists, icons, and leaders anytime, anywhere, and at your own pace. For example, you can learn songwriting from someone like John Legend. How about learning how to use your voice as an instrument from Mariah Carey, or learning cooking from Gordon Ramsay? Many of the classes they have at MasterClass are things like that. They have over 180 classes with a range of world-class instructors for that thing you've always wanted to do, and you can get closer to it than you think. One of our Locked On hosts, John Corrales, recently got involved with it, and he loved the selection. He thought it was super easy to navigate. The bookmark function was huge for him, so he could just come right back to where he was. Right, he was learning comedy from Steve Martin. Right, he really enjoyed it, and you can too. I highly recommend you check it out this holiday. Give the perfect gift of an annual MasterClass membership and get one free. Go to masterclass.com/lockedon today. That's masterclass.com/lockedon. Terms apply. Let me also talk to you guys about LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's super easy. Make a few clicks, post your job, then add the purple hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile. Spread the word that you're hiring. It's that easy. They have simple tools like screening questions that make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience. You can quickly prioritize who you want to interview and hire. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering high-quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the quality candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And we're now joined by Matt Moderno from the Bleav in Wizards podcast and writing over at Bullets Forever, the greatest SB Nation site out there, mostly because I was also there for a time, but also because the staff there is so talented every single year. Matt, the Wizards are struggling right now. Bradley Beal is hurt. Give me the 60-second elevator pitch on the state of the Wizards at this exact time.
Is it what fans think the state of the team is, or what the team thinks the state of the team is? Because if you ask the team, everything is sunshine and rainbows, and this just happens. There's parity in the league, and you're going to win 4 in a row, or you're going to lose 4 in a row. If you ask fans, I think they most would say that the dumpster is on fire already.
What do you feel like has led to? I mean, I know Beal's hurt, and that's a big one, and some of the allure of this game is lost there. Although the Pacers did beat the Wizards with Beal in DC already. These teams have played twice. But, yeah, as you look, like they've lost 7 of 8, and Beal is hurt. And Porzingis had this nice start. Things were looking good, and then they just slammed into a wall at full speed with the Beal injury being part of that. But to you, as you kind of have assessed this team in the last couple of weeks, what has been the biggest cause of their skid and why they have fallen out of favor so much?
5 of those 8 losses, I want to say, were with Beal. So maybe it's actually even 6 of the 8, of their most recent losses. So it's not like it was doing that much good to begin with, which is sort of the problem, I think. It's just lack of point guard play is probably one for starters. And it's not that Monte Morris is bad necessarily. He's just sort of like would be a really nice backup. He has reasonable assist to turnover ratio, but doesn't really penetrate or create a lot of easy shots for people. I think sort of his are the low-hanging fruit assists, if that makes sense. Defense is bad. You can't have both your backcourt players that play 25-plus minutes a game can't both be terrible defensively, and that's sort of where we're at right now. No 3-and-D wings. Every good team in the league seems to collect as many 3-and-D wings as they can, except maybe Cleveland. The Wizards have none, realistically. There's a lot of guys that can D or a lot of guys that can 3, and nobody that can realistically do both. If Porzingis isn't perfect, they look pretty bad defensively, and he's sort of matchup dependent, I think. So some nights he looks really good against other drop coverage bigs. When he has to switch onto a quicker, more mobile big like a Bam Adebayo or a perimeter-oriented big like Al Horford or somebody, it looks rough really quick.
Yeah, Monte Morris is really interesting to me as a point guard because a big part of his allure in a trade or even when he was doing well for the Nuggets as a backup is that insane. It's just the turnover ratio he has, right? He never turns it over, but he always is making the right plays. Like it's hard to be a negative player when you don't make the big negative plays. But the missed part of that is he never makes like the high risk aggressive plays that lead to turnovers a lot of the time. Like
right, a few
especially
more turnovers would be better, right?
yeah, just because of what it insinuates that he's doing or trying to cause to happen. And so I do think there is a lot of value in like never making negative plays. Like I really like Monty Morris. I don't think it's a secret. I watch the Wizards a lot to a lot of my listeners here. But at the same time, you really see it on a team that doesn't have a lot of other guys who can drive, forgive me if I'm wrong, or penetrate and really make the defense move, that their point guard is also not very capable of that. So they're kind of just whipping it around the perimeter at times. It feels like hoping that a matchup opens up or a switch is there in semi-transition. They can just happen to attack on a given possession.
And their bench is just really bad. Like it's probably the biggest one I should have mentioned. So that puts even more pressure on the starters to be perfect. And like I said, Porzingis a little matchup dependent, despite being pretty good overall this year. Kuzma is just hot and cold. I mean, when he's really good, he's really good, and when he's off, it can be tough to watch. And then you've got Beal. You know, he's gonna score his 20 to 30 and probably not give you a ton else. The playmaking is like a little better marginally so, but it's just not always consistently there, and the defense just isn't there. So if you have no bench, those guys just can't be even a little bit off. Your margin for error is just so small.
So Porzingis, you brought him up. He has historically been a nightmare for the Pacers. With Dallas, when he was playing the 4, they were putting way too small players on him. Against the Pacers, even earlier this season, he had some wonderful games, and such is the advantage of being a ginormous human. But now he plays the 5, which makes that a little easier to handle, and yet he's still kicking some butt this year. I think you were all over it too, that he was like all defense worthy pretty early in the season. Like maybe not quite at that exact spot anymore, but still way up there. What do you feel like has ignited his defensive improvement? And this is a loaded question, but do you feel like he's been the best Wizard this year?
I don't think it's that loaded a question, to be honest with you. I think he's had the most impact, right? So, like, for us, we were a bottom 5 defensive team the last couple of years, or bottom 10 at a minimum. And he sort of flipped that on its head just because there's a guy to clean up mistakes for sort of the turnstile-y perimeter defense they have going on. So I think maybe not an all defensive team kind of guy, but somebody that deserves a little bit more credit for just kind of changing the temperature of the defense here a good amount. I think the biggest difference is just he looks springier again. So he talked a lot about Dallas had him bulk up to bang in the post more. And when he got back to Washington, he's really worked with the staff here on being more lithe and flexible and trying to be sort of that to get that mobility back and be sort of less of a bulky dude, because we're not going to have him post up a ton anyway. And I think it just suits him better to be able to be somebody that can, actually stay in front of guys enough to be even sort of like a late switch kind of big.
Yeah, just being able to shoot over guys, like
not
regardless of a switch, makes him such a tough cover on offense.
Sure.
That's where the Pacers have really struggled with him. Well, this year he did most of his damage on the interior, but and Turner had not yet played, I believe. I think Turner played the second
first
time
game.
Yeah. Which also was a factor here. But he's historically done pretty well against this Pacers team, the schemes they have, the roster that they have. And so the fact that he is now playing a little more to what he believes his actual skill set should be, I think has made him even more of a threat against the Pacers, which is also a problem because of the other good thing happening in the nation's capital this year. Kyle Kuzma is also in their front court, who apparently has very high opinions of himself, which every player should. I'm all about that, but I'm just referencing the Anscape interview with him that just came out. Either way, Kuzma's been good this year as well. The Wizards front court has been their thing in the non-Beal division this year. Do you feel like Kuzma's playing better than last year? And if so, what is he doing so well that's kind of made him and Porzingis pair so well together?
I think he's just sort of what teams are looking for from like modern roster construction, right? You want a big guy with guard skills, and he's 6'10", and some of the defensive metrics like aren't great for Kuzma, but a lot of these post-game interviews, the teams, like especially the players he's matched up with, reference like, man, it's tough to shoot over a guy that's that long and that mobile. So if people feel like he's tough when they're guarding them, I tend to put a lot more, credence behind that than some of the actual analytics that back that up. But like I said, he basically is like a de facto point guard for them. A lot of times he initiates a lot of offense, and that's by design, mostly because he's one of the few guys that can probably get a mismatch and get into the paint and create for others. I think that's really big. He's been really clutch. I don't know what the clutch, shooting statistics actually say, but he's the guy I think most Wizards fans would probably rather have taking a shot late in the shot clock, late in a game, as opposed to Beal. And, I don't know if he's playing markedly better than last year. It is still a little up and down. The shooting percentages aren't great. He gets a little sloppy at times, but I'm probably the president of the Kyle Kuzma fan club here in DC. So I'm maybe not the most objective person to ask. Like you've got a lot of people that say the analytics aren't great. Kuzma's actually should be like a bench player. We need to trade him. But then they talk about like what they think they should get back in a trade. And it's like, we get a good young player, a first round pick, a second round pick. It's like, well, if you just said he's not good, why would a team give you all of that back for him in return?
Yeah. I've been dealing with that a lot this year. People who say, when Buddy Hield has a bad game, people will jump all over they should move Buddy Hield for a 3-and-D wing. I'm like, well, if you don't think he's good and you think they should move him, exactly. Who is giving up this piece for him? But I digress. That is not what we're here to talk about. Last question on the general state of the Wizards, because this is a big thing for the Pacers. Bradley Beal's not playing. I referenced it earlier, but he had over 30 when they played in DC. He had, I can't remember, mid-20s when they played in Indy. Like, obviously a very good player, and the Pacers, despite all the many things they've done well this year to surprise people, are not a good perimeter defense team. Their starting guards are not good at that. So they'll be blessed to know that the Wizards' all-star guard is not playing. How have the Wizards adjusted without him? Who's kind of stepped up as a scorer? Or if the answer is no one, what do they need to do better to kind of get his production back?
I mean, the obvious ones, I think, are Porzingis and Kuzma taking on kind of more of the offensive load overall. But it seems to be kind of a committee thing. Monte's good one night, makes some shots. Kispert's good one night, makes some shots. Denny will throw in a 15-point game here every once in a while. Will Barton looked like serviceable for a few minutes last night, which hasn't really happened much, if at all, this season. So that would be nice to see continue. Jordan Goodwin's had some good nights here and there. I think he's been pretty good overall, but he'll have a 12-point game every once in a while. So it's just really, they can't really depend on a lot of these guys, I think, is part of the problem. So it's a lot of just sort of who's the hot hand on any given night. Maybe you'll see Gafford have a 10-7 night or something like that.
If you're not keeping up with the Wizards and you're listening to this, Jordan Goodwin, get to know the name. That dude is good on a two-way deal. I think he started one of the games I caught this year. I don't know if he started very often since, but he's been good. I've been very surprised by him.
He's been closing games a good amount too when he's out there too. So, I mean, I think when you could put your two-way guy in sort of your crunch time situation, that's one, it's a luxury to have a guy good enough to do that. And two, it says a lot about where your backcourt is otherwise.
One more break here, guys, because this episode is brought to you by BetOnline.net, your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From football to basketball to soccer and esports, they've got it all at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at betonline.net as well. It's always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. Football lines up for the week. Raiders favored by 6.5 over the Baker Mayfield-led Rams on Thursday night football. No Colts this week. Finally, the bye week. But my Vikings, who are 10-2, are the underdogs in Detroit. The Lions favored by 2. All those lines and more at betonline.net. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action, because BetOnline is where the game starts. Thanks, everybody, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. Continue to chat with Matt Moderno here about the Wizard Tour in Indy tonight, except I don't want to talk about the game anymore. I want to do something I've been doing with people who cover other teams all season, because the Pacers said before the season they're going into this new long-term approach to team building. They've changed their mindset a little from what the Pacers of old do. And they didn't call it a rebuild. It's not a word they would use, but they did say skewing younger. We all understand how team building works in the NBA, regardless of what label you put on it. That said, they are 13-12 and have had this nice start. I'll be curious how that affects the way the Pacers operate, but that's not here or there. What I've been doing is, because the Pacers are doing a whole new thing, right? They have made the playoffs 25 out of 31 years, and it was their first top 10 pick since the 80s. Going low like this is not something they've typically done. So I've been asking other people about what they've thought was good about the way their team does team building, or maybe what was bad, and then what is something unique that they did. So open floor, Matt. You can say whatever you want about the Wizards team building process, and we'll get into bad contracts for sure because I have my Ernie Grunfeld thoughts ready to go. But from the Wizards' perspective, what do you feel like they have done well or poorly from a team building perspective?
Not to be like a negative Nancy, but I think the negative thing probably is a little more fresh in our minds, just given kind of the current state of the team. You pay a top 25-ish player, like a top 5 player, that already puts you behind the 8 ball from a team building perspective, and they've sort
They
of
did it twice. They did it twice.
right, exactly. We've now tripled down on that as a life choice. They're gonna have to make decisions on Kuzma, and historically they've been so locked into like we have to make the 8 seed that they're not willing to sort of make moves that make the most sense long term, like the choice to not trade Davis Bertans at the deadline a couple years ago when the Celtics reportedly offered 2 first-round picks, and then they had to like dump that contract immediately the next year because he looked so bad. So it's a lot of things like that. Like the owner has said publicly, we will never ever tank, and every decision they make is with that in mind. Like somewhere between 7 and 10 is exactly what they're aiming for. And that's exactly the roster they've built. So if you don't aim higher than that, you're probably never going to get higher than that unless you get magically lucky. I think everybody here talks about how poorly they've drafted, but for the most part, when you're drafting between 9 and 15, the kind of guys they've gotten are about what you can expect production-wise most of those years. Now, most teams, if they're in that range long enough, they're eventually going to hit on one of those picks. Somebody would pop, and the Wizards haven't really had that, but it's not like anyone they've drafted is outwardly bad. I guess the jury is still really out on Johnny Davis, but I presume he'll at least be a serviceable NBA player down the road. So it's just, if you're not going to sort of, aim a little higher with who you're willing to throw max money at, and you're not going to draft particularly well, and you're not really a sought after free agency destination, I just don't really know what your options are long term.
Yeah, the Wizards, more than probably any team in the league, have been crushed by the bird rights trap in the last 8-9 seasons where, right when they got really good and were 1 win from the conference finals, like they felt like they had to keep Wall, and this so happened that it overhapped with Mahinmi, but all these good players that they've had, Otto Porter was the same way, all of their best talent. Right when it got to its peak was their contract year, and then they got paid, and the Wizards kind of had to do it given the state of their team at the time. Maybe not so much with this most recent Beal one, but along the way it kind of felt that way. And so they kept their good players, which normally I would consider to be noble. But when you keep all of them combined with, I feel like I'm speaking wrong because I'm supposed to be asking you these questions, but
I totally agree.
Like the fact that they got combined with a team that signed a ton of bad contracts in 2016 with Andrew Nicholson and Mahinmi, and then dumping a first to get rid of Nicholson in the first season after signing him for a player that leaves, Bojan Bogdanovic, to the Pacers months later. Like they have a lot of they have been stuck by their own contracts, but also given away too many big ones along the way that kind of made it so they had no flexibility. That's where I feel like the Wizards have been stuck the most, is they haven't been able to easily move from core, not even core to core, but just, like serviceable player to serviceable player in a way that really helps them, to where if they lose someone in free agency, they're really kind of stuck because they have very few resources and finances to replace them. And so that is something the Pacers are really big on, is optionality and flexibility, because they don't want to get in those binds where they can't do anything to replace a player, or they're stuck where they can't make the right trade replacement. And the Wizards, well, I think it's good almost all the time to pay your good players and keep them, even if it means they're overpaid. I think that's the better outcome. But sometimes you can get in a bind, and it happens year over year over year over year, and it keeps stacking.
They mortgaged the future to kind of like go all in on a team that maybe wasn't as good as they thought it would be, and most of the Tommy Shepard era has been spent trying to slowly dig their way out of that. They don't want to bottom out, so it's making moves to get incrementally better each season. So you went from a 30-win team to a 33-win team to a 37-win team to, well, maybe back to a 33-win team because somebody got hurt, but can we get to a 40-win team? And it's just, it's sort of tiresome for fans, I think, to just think that, okay, this is what we have to look forward to. There's never really like a move they can make to noticeably change their long-term prospects, other than, one of those draft picks like really popping. And when your GM has said he's drafting role players, like that's his goal and his mission has been to find guys that are serviceable members of the rotation, that's saying outright that you're drafting sort of low ceiling, high floor guys, and that's essentially what we've seen.
Yeah, I was stunned after they did the Barton Morris trade that they would then pick Johnny Davis.
Right.
Okay, interesting. But anyway, that is noteworthy for the Wizards, especially because maybe this would be the hopium that you need. But the Pacers owner did the same thing last year, right? He said, no, we do not bottom out, right? I love my little team. We're going to try to be good every year. I think you can compete in this league without bottoming out, all this stuff. And then the Pacers just flipped the switch because they were awful last year and realized they can't do that forever. And I think that had to be hard to convince ownership to do that. Certainly, that's one of the hard parts of the job. But the fact that the Wizards are in a similar spot with ownership saying things like that, and they're chasing incremental improvements, which is something else the Pacers said, is they were going in 1 to 2 year increments with their old team building planning to then pivot to something new is very hard, but sometimes can be important, especially when the Pacers were at the end of the line with their old core. I feel like I'm saying a lot of stuff that's applicable to the Wizards. I'm sorry, I'm supposed to be asking you the questions, but Ernie Grunfeld makes me talk a lot because that was some of the worst team building stuff ever. What did the Wizards do?
Channeling where we feel, you're channeling the fan base here. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, just poorly run teams, not even poorly run. I think Shep is doing a decent job with the resources he has. It's just,
they're fine. Yeah, there's certain constraints. Like there were a lot of things behind the scenes with Ernie Grunfeld that he got like trashed for, and they were a lot of like mortgaging the future win now kind of things, and that was an ownership directive for a lot of those things. Now, not that he couldn't have done better than trading a top 5 pick in the Steph Curry draft for Randy Foye and Mike Miller, but he was told to make that move. So at a certain point, you can only do what you're directed to. And I think that's sort of where Shepard's operating from. Would he be better if he got a chance to totally rebuild? Maybe. But I think, you got to work within the framework that you're given.
Yeah, they did. What's the phrase? Like shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic. Like, okay, we got Trevor Ariza, Dwight Howard now. Like that was sort of like when your core is what it is. Sometimes you have to have the off ramp, and the Wizards just kept going on the on ramp over and over, which I think is something. It's not all doom and gloom. Do you have any positive things about what they've done, or have they done something unique to you in the team building process that you feel like, yes, this is good that the Wizards do this, and other teams could maybe emulate something from that?
I mean, I think from a trading perspective, Tommy Shepard's been relatively good on that front. Like he's taken sort of like nobody here was particularly big on Dinwiddie. The Dinwiddie experiment in DC did not go as planned. I think he got off. A friend of mine uses the arsonist fireman term a lot. Like he starts his own fires, but he puts them out. So it's good. Like the Bertans contract was rough, but he somehow turned those two pieces into Porzingis, and that one's worked out really well for him. Now the Morris Barton for KCP trade hasn't worked out particularly well, but that's sort of a smaller deal anyway. But for the most part, turning Wall into Westbrook, into Kuzma, and some flexibility and some other resources, I think those have been overwhelmingly positive deals. It's sort of all the other moves around the margins that haven't worked out the way they'd want.
You can tell like that Shepard knows when it's time to do that kind of stuff too. Like being timely is important. It's just hard when you're locked into the core of the Bradley Beal team. So we'll see where they end up going with that. And I think that's noteworthy for every team, is like knowing when it's time to do something. Being stuck for too long is always a problem.
I think for the Wizards this year, especially, like being locked into the play-in is sort of rough here. Like I'm not rooting for anybody to have an injury or anything like that, but I almost think it would save them from themselves. Like this would be a good year for them to be bad, just given the way this draft looks. Like you could be 10th in the draft and get like a really impactful player and make a real move next year and continue to make some of those fringe marginal moves. And then maybe you've made your ceiling go from the 8 seed to the 5 or the 6 seed. And that's something I think would be palatable here for fans, but they won't do that. So like last year, they doubled down at the end of the year and tried to win a couple games, as to help, integrate Porzingis a little bit and see what they had there. And then they ended up dropping to 10th in basically an 8-player draft. And they just can't afford to do that kind of stuff. So it doesn't even have to be a full tank. It's just, all right, let's be a little bit more selective in the years where like, are we chasing something that doesn't actually move the franchise forward here? And I think that's what people struggle with. Like the first round playoff gate that Ted gets for 2 home games for the Bucks to beat us in 4 games doesn't really help the franchise a ton. But ending up with the 8th pick in the lottery, that would be meaningful.
This is sort of me projecting question to end this, but the Warriors get all the headlines for this, right? The 2 timelines thing that they're doing. We have this vet core that we love. We still want to win the title, but we have these young guys. We're going to try to play at the same time. Wiseman, Moody, Kuminga, and see if they can get better at the same time. And that hasn't really worked for them. In fact, large part of their improvement coincided with sending James Wiseman to the G League. And I think the Wizards are kind of doing that too, to a much lesser extent, because their young guys, 2 of them are very serviceable right now. But next year, especially if they get another first, right, they'll have on rookie scale deals Hachimura and Avdia and Kispert and another dude and Johnny Davis all at the same time. Where it's like, at some point, if you're trying to be this playoff competitor who makes it, it's really hard to do that 2 timelines thing. And that's the thing I think every team, Wizards, Pacers, Warriors, whoever, needs to be cognizant of is, unless your rookies are Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, who are really good right away, doing the 2 timelines thing is so hard. It doesn't work very well.
It's just it's the same as what the Warriors want to do, but also different in that the Warriors went like really high upside guys, and they were all top 10 guys, whereas the Wizards were like 9 to 15. It's sort of that back end of the lottery as opposed to that. And what's the best case scenario for Denny Avdia? Probably a pretty solid, like, low end starter.
Whoa! That's slander for Denny Avdia in this
department. Hachimura, same kind of thing. Kispert is probably only ever the 5th best starter on a good team. I'm talking like actual good teams, not just like where they are in the Wizards. But if Kuminga pops, if Moody pops, like the best case for them, I think, is a lot higher, and they're swinging a little bigger with those things. And if just one of those guys hits, and they integrate them in that core, that's huge. They also have done well with guys in the 20s and Jordan Poole and things like that, and found guys on the margins. Like, we let Gary Payton go, and he was a really impactful player for them. So it's just sort of asset mismanagement, I think, a lot of the times.
That's key for every team. Pacers will, of course, need to take notes on how to avoid that as they try to build back into a contender here in Indianapolis. Matt, thank you very much for the time. Where can people listen to you, read your work, follow you, all the good stuff?
Run the Bleav podcast network, BLEAV. So it's Bleav in Wizards. It's probably twice a week, most of the times during the season. And I write for bulletsforever.com. So if anyone wants some Wizard stuff, let me know. And Tony, I'd love to have you back on at some point.
You got it. Always down and available. We'll be back Monday talking Wizards, Pacers, and Nets Pacers. All the good stuff from this weekend and the big storylines here on Locked On Pacers. Thank you guys a ton for listening. We'll see you on Monday.